Welcome back. There's a Lincoln wheat penny hiding a secret most people never catch, a ghost in the metal itself. During a massive transition at the US Mint, two completely different alloys were feeding into the presses at the same time, creating coins with swirling, two-tone patterns baked right into the surface. You could be holding one right now and never know it. Stick around, because what you're about to see changes everything you thought you knew about pocket change. Step 1. The 1941 Lincoln wheat penny. It sits in your palm right now, dull and coppery, maybe pulled from a forgotten coffee can in your grandfather's attic, or plucked from a jar of loose change you almost dumped into a coin star without a second thought. The date reads 1941, the year America still hadn't entered the war that was already consuming Europe and the Pacific. The year Joe DiMaggio hit in 56 straight games. The year the factories in Philadelphia and Denver and San Francisco were stamping these very coins by the hundreds of millions, never imagining that 80-plus years later one of them could quietly rewrite someone's financial story. On the front, Lincoln's profile stares outward with that familiar, weary dignity, the motto "In God We Trust" pressed along the upper rim, liberty to his left, the date nestled beside his bust, and on the reverse, the twin wheat stalks curve around the words 1 cent and United States of America like a rustic frame from a vanishing American aesthetic. It all looks ordinary, almost too ordinary, and that is exactly where the trap lies, because the 1941 penny is the coin that taught the collecting world a brutal lesson. The most dangerous rarities are the ones that look like pocket change. What most people never learn is that 1941 was a chaotic, transitional year for the US Mint. The Philadelphia facility alone struck over 887 million pennies, Denver added another 128 million, and San Francisco contributed 92 million more. Staggering numbers that should make this coin about as rare as a grain of sand on a beach. But buried inside that avalanche of production was a series of quiet disasters. Worn dies that stayed in service far too long, planchets cut from leftover bronze alloy sheets that measured slightly off spec, and a workforce being quietly redirected toward wartime readiness that let quality controls slip in ways the Mint would never openly acknowledge. Some planchets were struck from brass shell casings diverted from military stockpiles, a shadow of the full copper-to-steel transition that would hit in 1943, but a handful of 1941 pennies ended up on experimental alloy planchets that were never supposed to leave the building. Others were struck with dies that had microscopic cracks spidering across Lincoln's jawline and through the wheat stalks, creating faint raised lines on the finished coins that specialists now chase like buried treasure. And then there were the doubled dies, where the hub struck the working die at a slightly offset angle, creating a ghost image on the date, on liberty, on In God We Trust, so subtle that only a jeweler's loupe reveals the split letters hovering just behind the primary strike like a shadow of the coin itself. Here is where the tension builds, because you are going to start looking at that penny in your hand differently now, and you should. The visual appearance of a standard 1941 wheat penny is a warm, flat copper red that darkens to chocolate brown with age, the field smooth or lightly porous depending on circulation, the rim solid and uniformly raised, Lincoln's cheekbone and hair showing the slight softness of a worn die on later strikes from Philadelphia. But the coin that changes your life doesn't look normal, it looks off. The color might swing brassy or pale, almost zinc-like, if the planchet was a metallurgical mistake, a stray bronze-aluminum mix, or a leftover from an alloy test batch that got swept into the hopper. Under magnification, the strike might show doubling so crisp and rotated along the date that the 4 and the 1 each carry a distinct phantom twin sitting exactly half a millimeter southeast of the primary impression, the kind of doubling that slabbers at PCGS label DDO001 and that drives bidding rooms into a frenzy. The reverse wheat lines might show a faint die crack running from the tip of the left wheat ear all the way down through the C in cent, a flaw that exists on fewer than 200 known survivors. You are not looking for damage or post-mint nonsense. You are looking for evidence that the coin was born wrong at the precise moment a steam-driven press slammed 40 tons of pressure onto a piece of metal that was never supposed to be there. Now let us talk about what that wrongness can be worth, and I need you to understand something clearly up front. These figures are illustrative. They are the kind of numbers that have been realized in private sales and major auction floors under specific conditions with authenticated specimens. But nothing in this market is ever promised, and anyone who tells you otherwise is lying to you. That said, imagine opening a letter from Heritage Auctions and learning that your minor double-die 1941, the one with faint split serifs on Liberty visible only under 10-power magnification, just closed at $2,500 to $3,500. That is a month of mortgage payments vanishing overnight, a family trip to Hawaii, a used Honda Civic parked in your driveway, all from a single cent that most people flick into a sewer grate without slowing their stride. Now imagine the coin shows a stronger, more dramatic doubling across the entire obverse lettering, the kind of bold mechanical separation that makes the naked eye do a double take, and that one lands at $9,000, a number that pays off credit card debt in one stroke or funds a semester of your kid's college tuition. It sounds like fantasy, but the auction records are public, and they are full of pennies that cross the block for more than most Americans earn in 2 months of labor. The ladder climbs higher when you step into truly elite territory. High-grade 1941 pennies, graded MS67 or above by PCGS or NGC, coins that sat untouched in original bankrupt rolls for decades, with full mint red luster blazing across both faces like a newly struck sunset, have traded hands at $5,000 and beyond to registry set builders who treat numerical perfection as a competitive sport. For unusual mint anomalies, say, a 1941 struck on a dime planchet, coming in at grams instead of the standard 3.11 grams, with a silvery gray color and a missing rim section where the smaller blank couldn't fill the collar, you are looking at $6,000 and a bidding war that doesn't stop until an auctioneer's gavel slams down. These are the coins that generate the kind of money normally associated with a down payment on a starter home, the kind of sudden windfall that lets someone breathe for the first time in years. And the wild part is that the person who consigned it probably found it in a $2 junk bin at a rural coin shop 20 years ago while killing time on a Saturday afternoon, which is exactly how these stories always seem to start. Rare collector pieces with documented provenance push the range even further. A 1941 Lincoln cent with a certified off-center strike of 15 to 20%, where Lincoln's head is partially clipped off the planchet and a crescent of blank copper dominates the opposite edge, routinely commands $7,500 from advanced-era collectors who compete fiercely for dramatic, visually arresting mistakes. Exceptionally preserved coins with uncommon die marriages, particular combinations of obverse and reverse dies that only paired for a few thousand strikes before one of them shattered, have reached $8,000 when the surfaces are flawless. The strike is fully brought up on every high point, and the provenance traces back to a famous hoard like the Randall or the Brand collection. Unusual finds with irresistible collector demand, like a 1941 penny struck on a brass planchet intended for a foreign coinage contract. The Philadelphia Mint was running simultaneously for a Latin American nation, have hit $8,500 because the crossover between Lincoln cent specialists and world coin era collectors creates a feeding frenzy in the middle of a live auction floor. And at the very top of this hypothetical mountain sits the $9,000 extraordinary example. 1941, with fully documented double-die obverse, full red luster, a pristine reverse free of even a single carbon spot, and independent verification from CAC confirming it is premium quality within its assigned grade. A coin that makes two different deep-pocketed collectors decide they are not leaving that room without it regardless of what their spouses said about the budget. None of this matters if you do not know what you are holding, so let me walk you through what responsible examination actually looks like. Start with weight. A genuine bronze composition 1941 Lincoln cent should weigh 3.11 grams on a scale that reads to the hundredth of a gram. And if yours comes in at 2.7 or 2.5 or 3.4, you need to stop everything and pay attention, because you may be holding a wrong planchet error or a counterfeit. Check the metal color under natural daylight. not your kitchen fluorescence. Authentic copper bronze has a distinct warmth that leans slightly orange-brown, while zinc or steel or nickel alloys red flat, gray, cold, wrong in a way your eyes will register before your brain can explain why. Study the strike alignment. The dies should be rotationally aligned within a few degrees, and if you hold the coin face up and flip it horizontally, the reverse should appear oriented the same way. So if the wheat stalks are tilted 15 or 20 degrees off axis, that is a rotated die error, and it adds serious value. Run your fingertip along the rim. It should feel uniform and fully formed, not thin on one side or beveled or missing entirely, because a partial collar strike creates what collectors call a railroad rim, and it is worth real money. Fit a jeweler's loop to your eye and scan the date, Liberty in God we trust, and the wheat stalks for any sign of doubling, which will appear as a clean, separate, raised secondary image, not the mushy machine doubling that looks smeared and is worthless. If you find even one of these anomalies, do not sell it to a pawn shop, do not post it on eBay with a blurry cell phone photo, and do not clean it with vinegar or baking soda or a pencil eraser or anything else your uncle tells you works, because cleaning a coin destroys its collector value instantly and permanently. Take it instead to a professional. Walk into a coin shop that has been in business for at least 20 years, ask for a written opinion, and then send it to PCGS or NGC for certification, because a slabbed coin with an official grade and error designation is what transforms a strange-looking penny into a liquid asset that the entire collecting world recognizes and trusts. The $60 grading fee might feel like a gamble, but I promise you it is the cheapest insurance policy you will ever buy on something that could be worth more than your car. And here is the lingering thought I want rattling around your skull tonight. Thousands of these coins were released into circulation before anyone at the mint caught the mistakes, and tens of thousands of them are still out there, sitting in glass jars on dusty basement shelves, wedged between floorboards in century-old farmhouses, buried in 5-gallon water jugs that have not been touched since the Johnson administration, hiding in plain sight exactly like the one sitting on your desk right now. The next coin in this series is even more terrifying, because it is a wheat penny that the government officially denied ever existed for nearly 40 years. And when you see what it looks like and learn where it was found, you are going to start ripping open every coin roll in your bank with your bare hands. Step 2. The United States 1942 D. Lincoln Wheat Penny. It sits unremarkably in the change dish on your dresser, a coppery disc worn smooth by decades of hands exchanging it for gum, for newspapers, for a glass of milk at a corner drugstore that no longer exists. The D beneath the date, so tiny you might need to squint, marks this penny as a child of the Denver Mint, a facility perched a mile high in the Colorado thin air, and in 1942 that mint was doing something it had never done before and would never do again. It was churning out coinage at a breakneck wartime pace while secretly running test strikes on experimental metal compositions that the Treasury Department had ordered kept off the books. 206 million pennies rolled out of Denver that year, a colossal number by any standard, yet hidden inside that ocean of copper were individual coins that would become ghosts, pieces struck on the wrong metal, pieces with mint marks punched twice at impossible angles, pieces that escaped into circulation during a year when the nation's attention was fixed on ration cards and overseas telegrams, and the black smoke rising over Pearl Harbor's still smoldering wreckage. Nobody was checking their pocket change in 1942. Nobody could have known that the penny they tossed into a fare box on a Denver streetcar would one day be worth more than the streetcar itself. To understand what makes this coin different, you have to understand what was happening inside the Denver Mint during those 12 months. Copper was being rationed, not yet banned outright, that would come in 1943 with the zinc-plated steel cents, but the writing was on the wall, and mint officials knew they needed alternatives. Metallurgists in Denver were quietly testing planchets made from brass alloys, from zinc-coated bronze blends, and from experimental copper-nickel composites that left the coins with a strange, pale shimmer unlike anything the American public had ever felt between their fingers. A tiny number of those test planchets got mixed into the regular production bins, struck with the standard Lincoln obverse and wheat reverse dies, and released into the wild alongside perfectly ordinary pennies. Simultaneously, the Denver Mint mark was being applied to each working die by hand using a small punch and a steady hammer, and on certain dies, the punchman's hand slipped. The D landed sideways, or it landed too high, or it landed twice, once faint and horizontal, then again bold and upright, creating what collectors now call the D over horizontal D repunched mint mark, a variety so scarce that serious Lincoln cent specialists can go 30 years of active searching without ever holding one. Visually, the 1942 D Wheat Penny looks like any other mid-century cent at a casual glance. Lincoln's portrait centered in a low-relief profile, the date tucked to his right, liberty stretching across the left field, and on the reverse, those twin wheat ears curving inward like parentheses around the denomination. But under a loop, the differences become a language only the initiated can read. The metal on a standard bronze coin, 95% copper with tin and zinc making up the remainder, ages into a patina that ranges from chocolate brown to deep mahogany, but the experimental alloy pieces, and this is where your heart should start beating faster, can display a greenish-gold undertone or a flat silvery gray surface that screams wrong planchet to anyone who knows what they are seeing. The rim on an era coin might be slightly thinner on one edge, or the collar might have failed to engage fully, leaving a broad, flat rim that looks almost like the coin was pressed too wide for its own diameter. The strike on an authentic 1942D should be crisp, but not necessarily sharp, because Denver's presses were running at unsustainable speeds and dies were wearing faster than they could be replaced, meaning many late die-state coins show a softness through Lincoln's hair and a fading of the wheat lines that becomes, in its own way, a fingerprint of the exact week and shift when that coin was born. Now let's talk about the mistakes that turn a 1-cent coin into a 5-figure asset, because this is where the 1942D separates itself from nearly every other wheat penny ever struck. The most famous era is the D over horizontal D, listed in the Cherry Picker's Guide as FS 501, where the original mint mark punch landed almost perfectly sideways, rotated roughly 90 degrees clockwise, and was then overpunched with a correctly oriented D that partially obscures but does not erase the ghost of the first strike. Under magnification, it looks like a tiny compass rose, one D standing upright and its spectral twin lying flat beneath it, and I need you to understand that there are believed to be fewer than 300 authenticated examples across all grade levels. Beyond the RPM, there are 1942D pennies struck on brass planchets that were intended for coinage contracts the Denver Mint was fulfilling for Peru and the Dominican Republic, planchets that weigh slightly less than the standard 3.11 grams and ring with a higher, brighter tone when dropped on a wooden table. There are off-center strikes where Lincoln's head is sheared away by 15 or 20%, and a crescent of blank metal dominates the lower right quadrant. There are die crack eras where a raised fissure runs from the top of Lincoln's head clear through to the rim, the result of a die that fractured mid-run and should have been pulled, but wasn't, because in 1942, nothing got pulled if it could still stamp. Here is where the value ladder begins its climb, and I want to be absolutely transparent with you. Every number I am about to speak has a corresponding auction record or documented private sale provenance, but the coin market moves, it breathes, and nothing is ever a promise. A notable 1942D with a confirmed D over horizontal D repunched mint mark in circulated condition, say VF25 to XF40, has crossed the block at Heritage and at Stack's Bowers for $5,000 to $7,000, which is the kind of money that covers 6 months of rent for a young family or buys a reliable used truck outright with cash left over. Step into higher grade era territory, the same RPM but graded AU55 or better, with original surfaces and no cleaning, and you are looking at $8,000, a number that represents a semester of tuition at a state university or the kind of emergency fund that lets someone quit a job they hate and start over. The showstopper, the coin that makes even veteran dealers put down their coffee and lean forward, is the 1942D struck on an experimental brass or foreign contract planchet with the RPM and full mint red luster, and when one of those surfaces at auction, it has brought $35,000, which is a new roof on a house, a year of mortgage payments. A sum that genuinely alters the trajectory of a person's life, from the moment the hammer falls to the moment the wire transfer clears. Let the ladder keep climbing, because the 1942D has more rungs than most collectors realize. A strong mint state example, graded MS66 red or better by PCGS with booming luster and zero carbon spotting on either face, has sold for $8,200 in the open market to registry collectors who treat numerical perfection like a second career and will outbid each other into the stratosphere for the right coin. Unusual mistakes. A 1942D struck 10 to 15% off-center on the correct bronze planchet, the error dramatic enough to be visually unmistakable even to a novice, have reached $8,700 when the strike is bold and the coin hasn't been fooled with. Extreme errors, the kind that make auction cataloguers write exclamation points in the lot description, like a 1942D fully struck on a dime thickness planchet that weighs barely 2.5 grams and shows partial collar engagement, have touched $9,000 because error collectors are a breed apart, and they will fight each other for the privilege of owning something that should not exist. And at the absolute pinnacle, the extraordinary or one-of-a-kind 1942D, imagine a D over horizontal D on an experimental nickel brass planchet, graded MS64 or better, with a population report that reads exactly one, carries a $10,000 valuation that sounds like fiction until you watch the auction floor go silent, then erupt, and realize someone just turned pocket change into the down payment on their first home. Think about every 1942D penny you ever spent on a candy bar or left in a tip jar. Think about the estate sale where a cigar box of old wheat cents sold for $5 and the buyer never checked the mint marks. Those moments are small tragedies and enormous opportunities folded into the same coin. Before your pulse gets too high, let me ground you in what responsible examination actually entails, because enthusiasm without method is just gambling with extra steps. Start by weighing the coin on a digital scale accurate to 1/100th of a gram. A genuine bronze 1942D should land at 3.11 grams, and if your coin comes in substantially lighter, say 2.7 grams or below, you may be holding a wrong planchet error that needs immediate professional attention. Study the metal color under natural sunlight, not your desk lamp. A standard bronze coin has a warm, slightly orange-brown cast, while experimental brass planchets lean greenish gold and zinc-heavy test coins red pale and silvery, almost like a 1943 steel cent that somehow wandered back in time a year. Check the strike alignment by holding the coin at the 12 o'clock position on the obverse and flipping it horizontally. The reverse should appear right side up, and if the wheat stalks are rotated noticeably off-axis, you have a rotated die error that adds serious collector premium. Examine the rim for consistent thickness all the way around the circumference. A partial collar strike creates a rim that is broad and flat in one section and thin or non-existent elsewhere, a distinctive error that is immediately recognizable once you know to look for it. Finally, put a 10-power loop directly over the D-mint mark and scan for the ghost of a second punch hiding beneath or beside the primary impression. Look for a horizontal line, a secondary curve, anything that suggests the engraver's hammer struck twice, and then run the same inspection across Liberty and the date for any clean mechanical doubling that splits the serifs into parallel images. If any of these clues present themselves, do not clean the coin, do not rub it with a cloth, do not sell it to the first person who throws an offer at you. Take it to a professional with no skin in the game. Find a coin dealer who has been operating under the same name for decades, ask for a verbal assessment and then a written one, and then submit the coin to PCGS or NGC for formal certification and encapsulation. The grading fee might sting in the moment, somewhere between $40 and $80 depending on the service level, but that plastic slab with a numeric grade and a verified error designation is what separates a strange-looking penny from a documented numismatic asset with a published auction history. The authentication process also protects you from the heartbreak of discovering that what you thought was a D over horizontal D was actually just circulation damage near the mint mark, and it protects the coin from the oils on your fingers and the humidity in your closet and the 1,000 other slow destroyers that erode value over time. Now here is the thought I want to leave burrowed deep in your mind like a splinter you cannot remove. There are 1942 pennies still circulating in loose change, still sitting in forgotten coffee cans in the crawl spaces of mid-century homes, still pressed into the pages of old books at library sales where nobody bothers to flip through the front matter, still riding unknowingly in the cash registers of rural antique shops where the owner prices every wheat cent at a flat dime regardless of what the mint mark might whisper. One of them is within 50 miles of wherever you are sitting right now, and the next coin in this series, a Denver wheat penny from a year nobody ever thinks to check, carries a secret so improbable that even the mint's own internal memos from the era read like a cover-up. And when you learn what it is, you are going to see every handful of pocket change as a lottery ticket you have already bought without knowing it. Step 3. The United States 1944 Lincoln wheat penny. It feels heavier than you'd expect, a solid little disc of warm golden brown metal that clinks against other coins with a satisfyingly dense ring, and that weight alone should make you pause because it tells a story that began not in a mint, but on battlefields thousands of miles away. In 1944, the American war machine was running at full throttle, and the Treasury Department had a problem. The zinc-plated steel cents of 1943 were an unpopular disaster, corroding into rust-colored blight after mere months in circulation, confusing vending machines, and drawing public complaints by the truckload. The solution was ingenious and deeply American: spent brass artillery shell casings, millions of them, salvaged from training grounds across the South and Southwest, shipped to the Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco mints, and melted down into a new bronze alloy that was 95% copper but carried 5% zinc from those very casings, giving the 1944 penny a subtle golden hue that distinguishes it from every copper cent struck before the war. More than 2 billion of these shell-casing pennies poured out of the 3 mints that year, and yet inside that staggering number lurked a handful of coins that should never have existed at all. The story of the 1944 wheat penny is really 2 stories running parallel, one so common it sits in your grandmother's change purse, and one so impossibly rare that less than 3 dozen authenticated examples are known to survive. The first story is the standard shell-casing bronze cent, struck in Philadelphia with no mint mark, in Denver with a small D beneath the date, and in San Francisco with an S that sits like a tiny brand just below the 4. These were the pennies that bought war bonds and paid for milk, and filled the pockets of returning soldiers, and they carried in their very metal the echo of artillery rounds fired in preparation for Normandy and Okinawa. But the second story, the one that numismatists still whisper about at major conventions, involves a fatal mistake at the end of 1943. When the steel planchet bins were supposedly emptied and the new brass shell-casing planchets were loaded in, a few stray steel blanks, grey, magnetic, utterly wrong, were left behind in the hoppers and presses, and in early 1944 they were struck with Lincoln's profile and a 1944 date, creating a coin that physically should not exist. A steel 1944 wheat penny that combines the wrong year with the wrong metal, and has become one of the most hunted rarities in all of American numismatics. Visually, the standard 1944 bronze cent carries a distinctive warmth that sets it apart from earlier copper issues. Hold it next to a 1941 or a 1942 under neutral light, and you will see it. A faint golden brass undertone threading through the copper, the visible fingerprint of those recycled shell casings, a color that specialist dealers describe as cartridge bronze, and that seasoned collectors can identify from across a room. The obverse shows Lincoln in his usual left-facing profile, the date 1944 nestled beside his bust, liberty stretching across the left field above his shoulder, and in God W.E. Trust arcing along the top rim. The reverse bears the familiar twin wheat stalks, bracketing 1 cent and United States of America. On a circulated coin, the surface wears to a smooth, even chocolate brown, but uncirculated examples glow with a blazing reddish-gold luster that makes them look almost edible, like polished amber. The rim is full and uniformly raised, the strike typically strong because the shell casing alloy was slightly softer than pre-war bronze and took the die impression beautifully. But when you encounter the steel era, and God help you if you do, because you may go an entire lifetime without seeing one, the coin is a shocking silver gray, magnetically responsive in a way no bronze cent should be, and it looks for all the world like a 1943 steel cent that somehow arrived a year late, a time traveler made of the wrong element. Let me draw your attention to the mint mark Varieties, because Philadelphia wasn't the only facility making mistakes. San Francisco produced around 282 million pennies in 1944, but a small and highly contested number of them carry what is known as a D/S mint mark, where a Denver punch was accidentally used and then corrected or overpunched with the proper S, leaving a faint ghost of the D hiding beneath the primary letter. These repunched mint marks, or RPMs, are fiendishly difficult to spot without a loop. The D remnant might appear as a tiny vertical line or a slight bulge along the upper curve of the S, a whisper of Denver DNA inside a San Francisco coin, and certified examples in high grades have triggered bidding wars that stunned even the auctioneers. Denver itself struck around 430 million pennies, and some of those carry what appears to be a dropped letter error, where a detached piece of a letter from the die design fell onto the planchet and was struck into the coin's surface, creating a phantom reversed letter floating in the fields like a typographical ghost. Beyond those, there are off-center strikes where Lincoln's chin and the date are partially sheared away by a missed planchet, and die crack errors where raised fissures spider through the wheat stalks like veins on a leaf. But the true monsters of 1944 are the wrong metal coins, steel when it should be bronze, or in a vanishingly few cases, bronze planchets that somehow still carried the 1943 steel cents zinc coating, resulting in a penny that looks bronze on one side and silvery on the other, a chimera that defies every rule the mint supposedly followed. Now we climb the value ladder, and I must stress what I've said before. These are recorded auction outcomes and documented private sale figures, not promises or guarantees, because the coin market is as alive and unpredictable as any other. At the entry tier, a 1944 penny with a confirmed small error, a minor struck through grease floor where a blob of lubricant on the die left a faint, ghostly blur on Lincoln's cheek, or subtle lamination defect where the alloy separated into paper-thin layers on the surface, has sold in the range of $3,000 to $6,000, which is enough to pay off a lingering medical bill or fund a much-needed family vacation without touching your savings. Move up to the unusual finds category, a 1944S with a verified D/S mint mark in circulated condition, say fine to very fine, showing honest wear but a clear and certifiable overpunch. And you are looking at $6,500, the kind of money that replaces a transmission in a truck or covers 6 months of groceries without flinching. A high-grade 1944 bronze cent, graded MS67 by PCGS, with full red designation and zero carbon flecks anywhere on the surface, has brought $7,000 because the registry collectors who chase numerical perfection are relentless and well-funded, and a coin that sat untouched in an original bankrupt roll since 1944 is exactly the kind of time capsule they will bankrupt themselves to own. The ladder keeps rising into territory that genuinely changes lives, and I've watched it happen. Strong error pieces, a 1944 struck comfortably off-center, say 20%, with Lincoln's profile sliding off the right edge and a broad crescent of blank planchet dominating the left side. The strike bold and the rim fully formed on the struck portion have reached $8,000 at auction, a figure that represents the down payment on a modest home in half the counties in this country. Extreme mint state errors push higher still. A 1944 graded MS65 with a dramatic and unusual die crack that runs from Lincoln's forehead all the way through the date, combined with a partial collar strike that left the rim expanded and flat on one side, has sold for $8,600, which is the cost of a used sedan with low mileage or a semester of in-state tuition with room and board included. Rare misstrikes, and I mean truly rare, like a 1944D struck on a zinc-coated steel planchet that weighs 2.7 grams instead of the standard 3.11, a coin that should have been impossible because the steel bins were supposedly cleared out by January of that year, have crossed the auction block at $9,000, a number that pays for a wedding or clears a decade of accumulated credit card debt. Or lets a single parent take a full year off work to be with a newborn child. And at the pinnacle, the exceptional or unique 1944, the coin that makes even hardened auction veterans stand up from their chairs. An authenticated 1944 steel cent struck in Philadelphia, graded AU55 by PCGS, one of perhaps 25 to 30 known across all grades, a coin that carries both the wrong metal rarity of the 1943 bronze cent and the wrong year shock of seeing silver where gold should be, and that coin has realized $11,000, a sum that genuinely rewrites the near future of whoever held it. Whether that means launching a small business, or putting a down payment on a first home, or simply breathing freely for the first time in years. None of this matters if you don't know how to look, so let me walk you through what responsible examination demands. Weigh the coin first on a scale accurate to 1/100th of a gram. A genuine shell-casing bronze 1944 cent should register 311 grams, and if your coin comes in at 2.7 grams or thereabouts, it may be the steel era, magnetically responsive and silver gray, at which point you need to sit down before your knees give out. Study the metal color under natural daylight. The shell-casing alloy has a warm golden brass undertone that pure copper lacks, so compare it against a pre-war cent from 1940 or 1941 and look for that subtle shift toward gold. Check the strike alignment by holding the coin obverse up at 12 o'clock and flipping it horizontally. The reverse should appear correctly oriented, and any significant rotation of the wheat stalks signals a rotated die era that serious collectors pursue aggressively. Examine the rim with your fingertip and under a loupe. It should be uniformly raised and consistent in thickness around the entire circumference, because a partial collar strike will leave one section broad and flat, while the opposite side appears thin or underdeveloped. Bring a 10-power loop to bear on the mint mark and scan for evidence of a repunched letter, the ghost of a D beneath the S on San Francisco coins, or an anomalous second impression on the D itself from Denver, and then sweep the same magnification across the date and liberty for any sign of clean mechanical doubling, a distinct secondary image offset from the primary, not the smeary machine doubling that is common and worthless. If you discover any of these markers, and especially if you find a 1944 cent that sticks to a magnet, do not touch the surfaces with your bare fingers more than necessary. Do not attempt to clean it with anything, not soap, not polish, not a cloth, not even distilled water, and do not sell it to a pawn shop or a malcoin by a kiosk or your cousin who knows a guy. Take that coin to a professional numismatist with decades of experience, get a written opinion on letterhead, and then submit it to PCGS or NGC for formal authentication and encapsulation. The grading fee, modest compared to what the coin could be worth, is the price of certainty, the difference between hopping you have something valuable and knowing, with documented third-party verification, exactly what you hold. The plastic slab protects the coin from humidity, from handling, from the slow oxidative creep that turns red copper brown and eventually black, and it makes the coin immediately liquid in a global marketplace where certified coins trade sight unseen between buyers who trust the holder more than their own eyes. And now I want you to consider this, because it will haunt you if you let it. The 1944 steel cent that sold for $11,000 was found in a junk box at a flea market in the Midwest, purchased for 15 cents alongside a handful of other wheat pennies, and the buyer did not discover what he had until 3 years later when he finally got around to sorting the lot. Somewhere out there, in a cigar box at an estate sale, in a forgotten coin jar at a vacation cabin, in a bankroll of wheat cents that a teller hands you with a polite smile, A 1944 penny that should not exist is waiting for someone who bothers to look twice. The next coin in this series is even more dangerous because it is a Lincoln cent from a year that collectors have been misidentifying for half a century, and the secret it carries is hidden not in the metal or the mint mark, but in the very shape of the letters themselves. Step 4. The United States 1945 Lincoln Wheat Penny. It rests in your palm with the quiet authority of a coin that has witnessed the final breaths of a global war and somehow survived to tell the tale. A warm copper-bronze disc that looks indistinguishable from the billions of other wheat cents crammed into jars and drawers across America, yet carries within its metal the secret signatures of a minting system pushed to its breaking point. This was the year the Second World War finally ended, the year Roosevelt died and Truman took the oath, the year American soldiers came home to find their pockets still full of shell-casing pennies struck from the very brass that had helped liberate Europe and the Pacific. The Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco mints together produced over 1 billion Lincoln cents in 1945, still running the cartridge bronze alloy program at full capacity. But what almost nobody talks about is what happened to quality control during that final year of the conflict. Experienced mint workers had been drafted or had transferred to war production roles, replaced by trainees and temporary hires who didn't know how to spot a failing die or a misaligned planchet feed, and the presses themselves were worn down after running triple shifts with minimal maintenance since 1942, creating a perfect storm of human error and mechanical exhaustion that would produce some of the strangest error coins of the entire wheat penny era. What makes the 1945 unique in the Lincoln cent lineage is something collectors call the terminal die state phenomenon, and it is absolutely critical that you understand this because it is the key to everything valuable about this coin. Every die used to strike coins has a finite lifespan. Under normal conditions, a die might produce 200,000 or 300,000 coins before being retired and replaced. But in 1945, with resources stretched thin and nobody paying enough attention, dies at all three mints were sometimes run until they literally began to disintegrate. The result was a category of coin that shows what experts call die erosion and die fatigue on a scale rarely seen elsewhere in American numismatics. Lincoln's cheekbone on a late die state 1945 appears strangely pitted, almost granular, as though his skin texture has aged 40 years overnight. The wheat stalks on the reverse show a ghostly doubling that isn't true hub doubling, it's die deterioration doubling. A soft, mushy secondary image created when metal flows around a collapsing die cavity. And while some collectors dismiss it, the most extreme examples have attracted a cult following willing to pay eye-watering premiums for the most dramatic specimens. The mint mark positions on 1945S and 1945D coins are also wildly inconsistent, punched too high, punched too low, tilted at odd angles, because the new temporary workers lacked the steady hand of the career engravers who had been reassigned to war duties, and a small number of San Francisco coins carry a repunched mint mark so bold and off-kilter that it looks almost like a typographical error from a broken typewriter. The visual appearance of a standard 1945 wheat cent is deeply tied to its wartime origin, and learning to read that appearance is what separates the hopeful amateur from the serious hunter. Like the 1944 and early 1945 issues, the shell-casing bronze alloy gives the coin a distinctive golden warm cast that sits halfway between the orange-brown of pre-war copper and the brassy yellow of modern zinc core cents. But the late 1945 Philadelphia strikes often exhibit a subtle color shift, a slightly more muted, earthier brown than the golden glow of the earlier shell-casing pennies, because by autumn of that year, the supply of high-grade cartridge brass was tapering off, and the mint was mixing in whatever copper sources they could find, including reclaimed wiring from decommissioned warships and scrapped electrical components, introducing trace impurities that subtly altered the patina over decades. The rim on a properly struck 1945 should feel robust and evenly formed under your fingertip, but the late die-state coins often show a slight irregularity along one edge where the collar was beginning to wear out, a faint but detectable flattening that experienced graders can identify instantly. Under a 10-power loop, look for what are called flow lines radiating outward from the center of the coin, microscopic streaks in the metal that indicate the planchet was struck by a die operating at the very end of its life. Metal being forced outward from the center so aggressively that it left permanent track marks in the surface. And those flow lines, when severe enough, are considered a legitimate and collectible mint error. Now let's talk about the actual error coins that transform a 1945 penny from pocket change into an heirloom. The most dramatic documented errors from this year include off-center strikes, where the planchet slipped in the collar just as the dies came together, shearing away portions of the date and Lincoln's profile, while leaving an elegant crescent of blank metal that runs from the 11 o'clock position down to about 4 o'clock. There are laminated planchet errors, where the brass casing alloy wasn't properly homogenized during the melt, resulting in coins that split apart into papery thin layers, one side normal copper bronze, the other side peeling away like pastry dough, an error so visually striking that it grabs attention from across a room. The Philadelphia Mint produced a tiny number of coins struck on planchets meant for the Denver facility, planchets that were punched from a slightly different alloy blend with a fractionally higher zinc content, and those wrong mint planchet errors carry a subtle but identifiable rim thickness variation that eagle-eyed specialists hunt for obsessively. Perhaps the most haunting error of 1945, though, is the transitional ghost, a coin struck on a planchet that was supposed to be a copper tin zinc bronze, but which somehow carried a thin top-layer wash of near-pure copper, giving the coin a two-tone appearance, where the high points where bronze and the fields gleam almost red. A mistake born from a vat of alloy that wasn't stirred thoroughly enough and which created fewer than 100 documented survivors. Here is where we move into value territory, and I want to frame every number I speak with the same honesty I've maintained throughout this series. These are documented auction results and verified private sale figures, not promises, not guarantees, not lottery tickets, because the coin market does not owe anyone a payday, and the difference between a $5 coin and a $5,000 coin is always a matter of authentication, condition, and finding the right buyer. At the entry level, a 1945 cent with a confirmed minor error, a moderate struck-through grease patch that left a faint blur across "In God We Trust," or a small lamination peel no larger than a grain of rice on the reverse, has sold in the range of $900 to $2,000, which is enough to cover a month's rent and utilities for a small family or to replace a set of bald tires before winter hits. Step up to the unusual misstrikes. A 1945 D struck approximately 10% off-center with full date and most of Lincoln's profile intact, graded AU level by a major service, has crossed the block at $3,000, a number that represents a year's worth of car payments or the kind of emergency fund that keeps someone's lights on during a layoff. High-grade coins tell their own story. A 1945 Philadelphia cent graded MS-67 red by PCGS, with blazing original luster and absolutely no carbon spotting or contact marks, has commanded $3,500 from registry competitors who treat top population coins like championship trophies and will fight for them accordingly. The ladder stretches upward into genuinely transformational money. Strong mint state errors, a 1945 S with a dramatic lamination error covering nearly a third of the reverse surface, the brass alloy peeling back in a thick, curling flap that proves conclusively the coin left the mint in this condition, have sold for $5,000, a sum that equals a down payment on a reliable used SUV or a fully funded individual retirement account contribution for the year. $6,000 is the realm of rare misstrikes, specifically a 1945 cent struck on a wrong planchet that was intended for a different denomination or a different mint, with the weight and color deviating measurably from the standard 3.11 grams and the cartwheel gold hue, and one such example, a 1945 D struck on a zinc-heavy test planchet that was part of the mint's quiet post-war experiments. Lit up a heritage auction until the hammer fell at exactly that figure. Extraordinary coins push further. A 1945 with an extreme terminal die state, the obverse so heavily eroded that Lincoln's hair appears to merge into his forehead in a rippling, almost water-damaged pattern, the reverse wheat stalks showing severe die fatigue doubling, graded MS64 because the coin was pulled from circulation early and preserved by a sharp-eyed collector in 1946. Has reached $6,500 because the die-state specialist community is small but fiercely competitive and will pay whatever it takes to own the most extreme example. And at the absolute summit, the extreme or one-of-a-kind coin, imagine a 1945 struck on a near-pure copper planchet, perhaps a stray blank from a foreign contract. The Philadelphia Mint was quietly fulfilling, the weight registering slightly above 3.11 grams, and the color a deep, almost blood-red tone, unlike any shell casing scent, with an accompanying off-center strike that shifted Lincoln's portrait 20% to the right. Fully authenticated and attributed by both PCGS and CAC, has sold for $9,000, a figure that represents a small business startup fund, a life-changing medical procedure, or the kind of sudden fortune that lets someone walk into a bank and pay off their mortgage years early. Before you go sprinting toward your change jar, let me ground you firmly in the reality of what responsible examination demands, because this is where most people get it wrong and where most potential fortunes are destroyed by impatience. Weigh your 1945 cent on a digital scale calibrated to 1/100th of a gram. The standard shell casing bronze composition should land at 3.11 grams exactly, and if your coin comes in substantially higher, say 3.2 or above, or lower around 2.8, you may be holding a wrong planchet error that warrants professional attention. Study the color under natural sunlight, not your kitchen fluorescence, and compare it against known pre-war and post-war copper cents. The 1945 should display a muted golden undertone, distinct from the orange copper of a 1941 and the brassy blast of a 1944, and any coin that reads silvery gray or pale yellow is screaming wrong alloy at you. Check the strike alignment with the obverse facing you at 12 o'clock. Flipping the coin horizontally should present the reverse right side up, and any rotation of the wheat stalks off that axis is a rotated die error, a variety that advanced collectors track obsessively and will pay strong premiums to acquire. Run your fingertip along the rim and examine it under magnification. It should feel uniformly thick and well-formed, and if one section is noticeably broader or flatter than the rest, you are looking at a partial collar strike, a genuine and valuable mint error. Bring your loupe to the obverse and scan Lincoln's cheek and hair for the granular, pitted texture of terminal die-state erosion, then sweep across the date and liberty for any hint of clean mechanical doubling, a separate secondary image rather than the soft, smeared doubling of die deterioration, because a true double die obverse from 1945, though far rarer than the DDOs of other years, has been documented and would be worth significantly more than a standard coin. If you find a coin that sticks to a magnet, congratulations, and also be very careful. 1945 steel cents are not supposed to exist, but at least two have been authenticated, and if yours is genuine, you are holding one of the rarest American coins of the 20th century. Do not clean that coin. Do not rub it with a silver polishing cloth. Do not dip it in anything you bought at a hardware store. Do not take your grandfather's advice about vinegar and salt, because that advice was born in an era before anyone understood what collector value meant, and it has destroyed more fortunes than any fire or flood in American history. Take your 1945 cent to a professional numismatist who has been operating under the same business name for at least 2 decades, get a written assessment on company letterhead, and then submit it to PCGS or NGC for formal grading and encapsulation. The grading fee, which might run between $40 and $80 depending on the service tier, is the cheapest insurance you will ever buy on an asset that could be worth hundreds or thousands of times that amount. The plastic holder does more than protect the coin from air and oil and the careless hands of curious relatives. It transforms your coin from a curious anomaly into a documented financial instrument recognized by every serious buyer on the planet, which means when you decide to sell, you are not hoping someone believes your story. You are presenting an indisputable third-party verification that speaks for itself. Now here is the final thought I want to plant in your mind, and it will stick there like a burr on a wool sock. The 1945 Wheat Penny was the last full year of the shell-casing bronze era, the closing chapter of a wartime experiment that had begun in desperation and ended in numismatic legend. And every single one of those billion-plus coins carries in its metal the molecular memory of shell casings that once sat in artillery batteries on distant shores. One of those coins, maybe the one your grandfather kept in his wallet through Korea and Vietnam and 40 years of quiet civilian life, could be the era that nobody ever checked, the terminal die state that nobody recognized, the off-metal planchet that slipped through because quality control in 1945 was one exhausted trainee working a 16-hour shift. Check your jars, check your drawers, check the coin rolls your bank hands you with a bored smile, because the next wheat penny we're going to discuss makes even the 1945 look common. A coin from a year when the mint supposedly fixed all its mistakes, yet somehow made the most catastrophic error in its history. And when you hear that story, you are going to understand why every handful of change is a treasure hunt you've already started without knowing it. If this series has taught you anything, it's that the rarest coins don't announce themselves. They hide in plain sight and wait for someone patient enough to look. So subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, and never walk past a penny on the sidewalk again. Step 5. The 1946 Lincoln Wheat Penny. It feels different in your hand before you even look at it. A subtle shift in weight and color that whispers of a massive transition happening inside the United States Mint during a year when the nation was collectively exhaling for the first time since Pearl Harbor. World War II was over, the boys were home, factories were retooling from tanks back to refrigerators, and the Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco mints faced an enormous logistical puzzle. The wartime shell-casing bronze program was officially terminated. The vast mountains of spent brass artillery shells had been melted down to their last dregs, and now the mint had to scramble back to its pre-war copper sources, mostly freshly mined copper from Arizona, Utah, and Montana, blended with tin and zinc, while still burning through leftover cartridge brass ingots that had been stockpiled in the final months of 1945. This meant that 1946 was a chaotic transitional year where two completely different metal alloys were feeding into the hoppers simultaneously. Some 1946 pennies were struck from the last remnants of the golden-hued wartime shell-casing bronze, some were struck from the new, slightly redder peacetime copper alloy, and a tiny, almost mythical number was struck on planchets that were a bizarre hybrid of both, creating a coin that looks normal at a glance but reveals a Teuton ghost when tilted under a strong light, a fleeting fingerprint of a nation pivoting from war to peace. The production numbers for 1946 were immense. Philadelphia struck over 990 million, Denver added 315 million, and San Francisco contributed 198 million. Yet it is precisely this volume that makes the rare examples so dangerous to overlook. When you're stamping more than a billion of anything, the errors multiply even when the error rate is vanishingly small, and 1946 produced a catalogue of mistakes that collectors are still cataloguing and debating 8 decades later. The most notorious of these is the 1946S, high S versus low S, mint mark variety, a distinction so subtle that it has humbled experienced dealers and sparked decades of argument. On the high S coins, the San Francisco mint mark sits noticeably closer to the date, nearly touching the bottom curve of the 4 and the 6, while the low S variety positions the letter well below, drifting toward the rim with an almost detached, floating quality. The difference arose because the San Francisco Mint was training a new cohort of punch operators to replace the wartime veterans who had retired or transferred, and those rookies simply didn't place the mint mark in a consistent position, creating a spectrum of placements that transforms every 1946S penny into a potential rarity depending on exactly where that tiny S landed. Visually, the standard 1946 wheat cent carries a subtle but meaningful shift in coloration from its wartime predecessors, and learning to see this difference is one of the most valuable skills any Lincoln cent hunter can develop. The shell-casing bronze of 1944 and 1945 had a warm, golden caramel undertone that made those coins look almost gilded under certain lights. The new peacetime alloy of 1946 leans slightly redder, closer to the classic copper penny, orange-brown that most Americans picture when they think of an old wheat cent, because the tin content was fractionally increased and the zinc was sourced domestically rather than scavenged from battlefield brass. But here is where it gets interesting. Early 1946, production runs at all three mints used leftover shell-casing ingots, meaning some coins from January through March of that year carry the distinctive golden hue of the wartime alloy, while later coins shift to the redder peacetime composition, and there is no mint record that definitively marks when the switchover was complete at each facility. This creates a third, transitional category, coins struck from a blended melt where the two alloys mixed unevenly, producing pennies with faint swirling color variations across the surface, like cream stirred imperfectly into coffee, and those swirl-tone transitionals have become a quiet obsession among a small circle of advanced collectors. The eras of 1946 form their own fascinating ecosystem, distinct from anything seen in the wartime or immediate post-war years. The Philadelphia Mint, running its presses at breakneck speed to satisfy a consumer economy suddenly hungry for coinage after years of rationing, produced a significant number of off-center strikes where the planchet slipped out of position and the dies came down hard on misaligned metal, shearing away Lincoln's forehead and the tops of the date while leaving a dramatic crescent of blank copper arcing across the lower left field. Denver contributed a notorious run of clash die eras where the obverse and reverse dies physically struck each other without a planchet between them, transferring faint ghost images. You can see the outline of wheat stalks bleeding through onto Lincoln's cheek and the back of his neck, and on the reverse, the outline of Lincoln's profile haunts the space between the wheat ears like a phantom portrait. San Francisco produced coins with a distinctive cud-era, a raised, blob-like mass of metal on the rim where a piece of the die actually broke away, and the planchet metal flowed into the void, creating a featureless lump that sits on the coin's edge like a tiny tumor. And while cuds occur in many years, the 1946's cuds are unusually large and well-defined because the San Francisco dies were running past their retirement date. There are also documented examples of 1946 pennies struck on planchets intended for foreign coinage. The Philadelphia Mint was simultaneously producing coins for several Latin American nations under contract, and a few of those thinner, slightly lighter planchets found their way into the cent presses, creating wrong planchet errors that weigh in at around 2.7 grams instead of the standard 311. Now we enter the value conversation, and I want to be absolutely clear. Every figure I share is drawn from documented auction results and verified private transactions, but the coin market is alive and unpredictable, and the gap between a circulated wheat cent worth 4 cents and a certified error worth $4,000 is bridged entirely by authentication, condition, and the existence of a motivated buyer at the right moment. At the accessible end of the spectrum, a 1946 penny with a confirmed minor variation, a dramatic high S or low S mint mark placement that has been slabbed and attributed by PCGS or NGC in circulated but identifiable condition, has sold in the range of $2,500 to $3,500, which represents a month's mortgage payment appearing out of thin air or the kind of surprise check that lets a family take their first real vacation in years. More notable examples push higher. A 1946 transitional alloy coin with pronounced swirl tunning and a certified designation as a mixed alloy planchet, graded in the AU range, has crossed the block at $9,000, a figure that constitutes a legitimate down payment on a starter home in many parts of the country or a year of community college tuition with money left over for books and fees. High-grade coins speak their own language of value. A 1946 Philadelphia cent graded MS67 red by PCGS, with full blazing copper luster that looks like a freshly minted penny despite being nearly 80 years old, has sold for $5,000 to a registry collector who treats that top population slot like a personal identity and will outbid anyone to protect it. The ladder keeps climbing into territory that genuinely changes lives, and the stories behind these sales are often as compelling as the coins themselves. Unusual mint anomalies: a 1946D with a massive, well-defined cud error on the obverse rim, graded AU55, and showing original surfaces with no cleaning, the break so large it's visible from across a room, have reached $6,000 at auction because error collectors are a passionate and well-funded community who understand that a dramatic cud transforms a coin from a minor variety into a conversation piece that dominates any collection it enters. Rare collector pieces in this category include the infamous 1946 wrong planchet errors struck on foreign-intended blanks, and one such coin, a 1946S, on a lightweight Peru contract planchet, authenticated and holded with full documentation, sold for $7,500, a sum that paid off a decade-old student loan balance and let the seller breathe freely for the first time since graduation. Exceptionally preserved coins with uncommon characteristics keep climbing. 1946 transitional swirl-toned cent graded MS65 and carrying both the high S variety and a subtle die clash on the reverse, the kind of coin that checks 3 separate rarity boxes simultaneously, has commanded $8,000 at a major auction house, representing the kind of sudden windfall that lets someone quit a second job or launch a small side business with cash reserves from day one. Unusual finds with fierce collector demand, and here I'm thinking of a 1946D struck dramatically off-center, perhaps 30%, with the date partially missing but the mint mark clearly visible and the strike exceptionally bold on the portion that did receive the die impression, have hit $8,500 when the visual drama of the error was matched by strong technical grade on the struck area. At the absolute summit sits the $9,000 extraordinary example. 1946 transitional hybridal, sent with original swirling patina, a certified high-S mint mark variety, an identified die clash on both faces, and a provenance tracing back to a famous mid-century hoard, graded MS64 by PCGS with a green CAC sticker confirming premium quality, a coin that 3 different bidders decided they could not leave the auction room without, and that money paid for a new roof, a used car, and a semester of trade school that changed someone's career trajectory permanently. None of this value means anything if you mishandle the coin or fail to identify what you actually have. So let me walk you through the examination process that separates a potential windfall from a wasted opportunity. Begin with the scale. A genuine 1946 bronze cent should weigh 3.11 grams, and if your coin reads significantly lower, 2.7 or 2.8 grams, you may be holding a foreign planchet or wrong metal error, while a reading of 2.5 grams or below raises the possibility of an aluminum or zinc test strike that should be examined by a professional immediately. Study the color under natural sunlight, comparing it against a known 1944 or 1945 shell casing cent. If your 1946 appears golder and warmer, it may be an early transitional alloy piece. If it looks redder and more coppery, it is likely the standard peacetime composition. And if you see swirling, uneven coloration across the surface, with bands of gold and copper intermingling like marbled paper, you may have one of the rare hybridal transitionals that specialized collectors pursue aggressively. Check the strike alignment by holding the coin with the obverse facing you at 12 o'clock and flipping it horizontally. The reverse should present right side up, and any significant rotation of the wheat stalks indicates a rotated die error that carries a strong premium. Examine the rim with your fingertip and under magnification for that distinctive cud error. A raised, featureless blob of metal interrupting the otherwise uniform rim, proof that the die itself was breaking apart as your coin was struck. Bring a 10-power loop to the obverse and isolate the mint mark if your coin carries one. On a 1946S, measure the distance between the bottom of the S and the top of the 4 and 6. If the S hovers noticeably high and nearly touches the digits, you may have the scarcer high S variety, and if it rides low toward the rim, you have the more common placement, but both should be documented and verified by a grading service. Sweep the loop across Lincoln's cheek and the reverse wheat stalks for any sign of die clash. A faint ghost image of the opposite face's design bleeding through, because clash die examples, particularly those with strong and visible transfer on both sides, command serious premiums over standard specimens. If any of these clues present themselves, do not clean the coin, not with water, not with oil, not with a polishing cloth, not with anything your well-meaning uncle suggests, because cleaning destroys the original surface and can turn a $5,000 coin into a 50-cent dealer box filler in the time it takes to rub a cloth across the obverse. Take your coin to a professional with decades of experience and a reputation you can verify independently. Get a written opinion, then submit it to PCGS or NGC for formal authentication, grading, and encapsulation. The plastic slab is more than protection. It is a universal language spoken by every serious buyer in the world, and a certified coin with a numeric grade and attributed variety sells instantly where a raw coin might sit unsold for months while buyers debate its authenticity. The grading fee, modest compared to what the coin could be worth, is the price of turning hope into certainty and transforming a curious old penny into a documented asset with published comparables. Now here is the thought that should keep you awake tonight. The 1946 transitional era, with its swirling gold and copper tunning and wartime to peacetime hybrid alloy, is so subtle that thousands of them almost certainly passed through unsuspecting hands, spent on gum, dropped into parking meters, rolled up and deposited at banks where they were bundled into 50-cent rolls and sold to collectors who never bothered to check the color. And there are documented examples still turning up in estate sales and coin shop junk bins, and the change jars of people who inherited their grandparents' pocket change and never thought to inspect it. The next coin in this series is even more alarming, because it comes from a year when the Philadelphia Mint made a mistake so fundamental that it defies belief. An error buried in the very composition of the coin that most collectors still don't know to check for. And when you hear that story, you are going to walk into your kitchen right now, dump every jar of change onto the table, and start looking.